crime boss, a woman who's kept a secret for 7 years, a child wearing a compass only one person in the world has ever held. When Damien Cross emerges from the shadows to save a stranger child, unbeknownst to him, he's just stepped straight into the most dangerous battle of his life, not against an enemy, but against his own blood. Like now and comment the city you're watching in. Let me know how far this story has come. Don't go anywhere. The paper airplane caught the wind wrong. That was how it started. Not with gunfire, not with a threat, not with any of the things Damien Cross had spent the last 15 years preparing himself for. It started with a folded square of white notebook paper, the kind a 7-year-old boy creases with his tongue pressed between his teeth, and it caught the morning wind off the harbor and sailed straight out into Harbor Street before the boy even realized his hands were empty. Evan Holloway ran after it without thinking. That was the thing about 7-year-olds. They didn't calculate consequences. They saw the thing they wanted, and their legs just went. Claire was 3 steps behind the door of the bookstore, arms loaded with a cardboard box of new arrivals she'd been meaning to shelve since Tuesday. She heard the bell above the door and looked up, and Evan was already past the curb, already in the street, the red rubber soles of his sneakers flashing as he sprinted toward that ridiculous paper airplane tumbling along the wet asphalt. She dropped the box. She didn't feel it hit her foot. She was already screaming his name. The truck didn't have time to brake. It was a commercial delivery rig doing maybe 40 through a 30 zone, the driver's face snapping up from whatever distraction occupied him a half-second too late. And the wet road gave the tires nothing, and the horn blast was long and primal and useless. Damien was across the street. He had been sitting at the window table of the Anchor Diner for 40 minutes, drinking coffee that had gone cold, watching the bookstore the way a man watches something he has no business watching, with his shoulders turned slightly away, with his eyes doing the actual work, with the careful blankness of someone trained to look like he isn't looking. He told himself this was the last morning. He told himself that every morning for 11 days. He was moving before he understood why. His body made the decision before his mind caught up. He was out the diner door and into the street in the same motion, and the truck horn was tearing through the rain-damp air, and he had maybe 2 seconds to cross the distance between himself and the boy. He crossed it. He hit Evan low and sideways, wrapping the boy against his chest and twisting so that his own back and shoulder took the mirror of the truck's wing as it skidded past, close enough that the displaced air shoved them both, and they went down hard onto the wet concrete of the opposite sidewalk, Damien's palm taking the worst of it, gravel opening the skin below his thumb. The truck screamed to a stop 20 yards down the block. A car behind it fishtailed. Someone on the sidewalk was yelling. Damien lay still for 1 second, Evan's small body pressed against him, and he cataloged himself the way he always did after impact. Ribs, spine, head, and everything reported back operational. The boy was making a sound, not crying. Something smaller than crying, a held breath finally releasing itself in a high, thin note, more shock than pain. Damien sat up. He set the boy upright on the sidewalk, holding him by both shoulders, and looked at him. The boy looked back. He had dark eyes, watchful ones, and he was doing what children do in the aftermath of terror, running a private audit of his own body, cataloging scrapes and sensations, trying to determine whether this was the kind of thing that required crying or the kind he could absorb. His left knee was scraped through his jeans. That was all. Damien started to say something. He didn't know what. Something functional, something designed to help the boy regulate his breathing, and then he saw it. The compass. It hung on a thin cord around the boy's neck, the pendant resting just below the collar of his jacket, and the silver was worn the way silver gets when it's been handled constantly over years, smooth at the high points, the engraving on the back partially blurred by touch. But Damien knew that engraving. He knew it because he'd stood in a jewelry shop on the other side of the country 7 years ago and watched an old man press it into the metal with a tool the size of a pen. Find your way back. His own handwriting, rendered in someone else's hand. He stared at the compass. The boy stared at him. And then Claire hit her knees on the sidewalk between them, her hands moving over Evan's face and arms, her voice coming out fractured and high, in a way she clearly hated, checking his eyes, checking his limbs, pulling him against her chest and pressing her mouth against the top of his head. Damien stood up slowly. Claire looked up at him. And the color left her face the way water drains from a tub, not all at once, but irrevocably, and with no way to call it back. She knew his face. He could see that she knew it. She was better controlled than he expected. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice when it came out was stripped down and careful. "You saved him," she said. "He's okay." Damien's voice came out lower than he intended. Knees scraped. He should be checked anyway. She stood. She was holding Evan against her side now, one arm locked around him, and she was looking at Damien the way you look at something that might be real or might be a trick of bad light, with equal readiness for either answer. "I know who you are," she said. Quiet. Just for him. Damien held her gaze. "Then you know I'm not here for whatever you're thinking." She said nothing. A police cruiser was working its way through the snarled traffic 2 blocks down, lights going. The truck driver had climbed out and was standing in the street looking shaken and old. "Thank you," Claire said. The 2 words cost her something. He could hear the price of them. She turned and walked Evan back to the bookstore. She didn't run. She didn't look back. The door closed behind them and the little bell above it rang twice and went quiet. Damien stood on the wet sidewalk with blood on his palm, and the image of that compass burned into the back of his eyes. He was supposed to be in Portland by noon. He had a meeting with a man named Rourke, who moved freight containers and asked no questions, and owed Damien Cross a favor that had been accumulating interest for 3 years. After Portland, there was Seattle, and after Seattle, there was a name on a list that needed to be addressed before that name became a problem large enough to require a different kind of solution. He called his driver and told him to find somewhere to park. He went back to the diner and ordered more coffee and sat down at the window table again. The bookstore's lights were on. Through the rain-streaked glass of the diner window, he could see the warm interior, shelves, a reading lamp, the back of Claire's head as she moved between stacks. After a while, the boy appeared at the front window of the store, pressing his nose to the glass, looking out at the gray street with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who has already metabolized his close call and moved past it. Damien watched him for a long time. The compass had been a parting gift. That was the word he'd used when he gave it to Claire. He'd told himself it was a parting gift, something to mark the end of a chapter, something she could throw away or keep or sell, and he would never know which. He'd given it to her the night things fell apart, which was not a single night so much as a slow accumulation of nights that had simply been named after the last one. He'd been 28. He'd already been deep enough in his family's business that extraction was theoretical, something other men did in movies. She had been 23 and running a used bookstall at a weekend market, and she had possessed an absolute absence of fear about him that he had never been able to explain. Not recklessness. Not the attraction to danger that he'd seen in other women who found themselves drawn to men like him. Something else. A refusal to be impressed by the things that were supposed to impress people. They'd been together 8 months. Then they hadn't been. He had not known she was pregnant. At least that was what he told himself, in the specific way a person tells themselves something they need to be true. But there were moments, even now, when the calculation surfaced uninvited. She had known him, had known what he was embedded in, and she had made a decision without involving him. And he didn't know whether that made him angry or whether anger was simply easier than the other thing, which was the recognition that she may have had very good reasons. The boy was 7. He sat in the window of the diner and did the arithmetic he'd been doing since the moment he saw the compass, and the math came out the same every time. He needed to be wrong. He needed there to be another explanation, a copy, a coincidence, an identical piece of jewelry purchased somewhere else by someone else. He was a man who had built his life on the precise management of information, and he understood that the plural of coincidence was not evidence, and he would not allow himself to move on a feeling. But he also understood that some things had a weight to them that was independent of proof. He finished his coffee. He put 2 20s on the table and walked out into the rain. He did not drive to Portland. He came back to the bookstore the next day. This was a decision he would have criticized in any of his subordinates. It was sentimental. It was operationally unnecessary. It created a pattern where none should exist. He'd spent 15 years building an organization on the principle that no move should be made without a clear objective, and walking into a secondhand bookstore in a coastal town of 12,000 people because he could not stop thinking about a compass. Had no objective, he was willing to name honestly. He told himself he was looking for information. He was good at that particular lie. The store was called Holloway's, which told him she hadn't married, or had married and kept the name, or had reverted to it. The sign above the door was hand-painted in dark green letters on a pale yellow background. The windows were clean, there were flower boxes below the sills, the November flowers cut back to stubs. Someone maintained this place with care. Someone had invested years in it. A small bell above the door. He already knew its sound. She was at the counter when he walked in, pricing a stack of trade paperbacks with a sticker gun. She looked up. Something moved across her face. Not surprise, not quite. More like the expression of someone who has bet on a horse and watched it come in. She didn't say anything. He picked up a book from the nearest display table. He didn't look at the title. He carried it to the counter. "How much?" he said. She looked at the book. $12. He put a 20 on the counter. She made change. Their fingers didn't touch in the exchange. He moved to a section near the window. History, the spines said, though he wasn't reading them. And he stood there for 20 minutes reading nothing and watching the store without watching it, the way he'd been trained to take in a room. There were 3 other customers. A woman in her 60s with a tote bag and reading glasses pushed up on her head. 2 college-age men debating something in the graphic novels section. The store smelled of paper and something warmer, coffee or wood smoke. He couldn't locate it. Evan appeared from the back at some point, dragging a small backpack, clearly just returned from school. He stopped when he saw Damien. Kids process threat on instinct. Damien had always known this, but Evan didn't register threat. He tilted his head and studied Damien the way he might study a new word he'd come across in a book, with curiosity and some private method of assessment. "You're the man from the street," Evan said. "Yeah." "Does your hand hurt?" The boy was looking at the bandaged palm Damien had done himself at the motel that morning. "Not much." Evan seemed to find this satisfactory. He dropped his backpack behind the counter and climbed onto a stool and pulled out a library book with a dinosaur on the cover, and that was the end of his interest in Damien Cross. Claire, from behind the counter, watched this exchange without expression. Damien left. He came back the next day. And the day after. He bought books he would never read. He sat at the small cafe table near the window where Claire had set up a coffee station for browsers. A thermos and a stack of paper cups and a hand-lettered sign that said, "Help yourself, leave $1 if you can." He sat there for an hour each morning and read nothing and learned everything. He learned that Claire ran the store alone, with occasional weekend help from a teenage girl named Maya. He learned that she lived in the apartment above it. He'd clocked the entrance on the side street on day 2, the light that came on at roughly 10 each night. He learned that Evan walked to school alone on dry mornings, which she clearly hated, which was visible in the way she stood in the doorway watching him until he turned the corner, and only then went back inside. He learned that she took her coffee black, and that she read at the counter between customers, and that she had a habit of pushing her hair back with her left hand when she was concentrating, and that she never once looked at him the way a woman looks at a man she fears. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a man she's decided how to handle. On the 5th day, she appeared beside the cafe table while he was sitting there and set a fresh cup of coffee down in front of him and said, "You can stop pretending to read." He looked up. "I'm not going to call the police," she said, "if that's what you're wondering." I wasn't. "Because I know who you are and I know how that goes." She sat down in the chair across from him, which surprised him. She sat with her spine straight and her hands flat on the table, which was a posture he associated with people who'd taught themselves not to show nervousness in situations where they felt it. "So what is this? What do you want?" "I saved the boy's life." "I know you did, and I'm grateful. That doesn't answer what you're doing here." He looked at her for a moment. She looked back without blinking. "The compass," he said. Her jaw tightened, barely. He wouldn't have caught it if he hadn't spent his adult life reading people in rooms where misreading them had consequences. "I gave it to you," he said, "years ago." "You gave it to me," she said, "so it's mine. And I gave it to my son." "Why?" Because it's a compass. Her voice was flat. Because he likes old things. Because I wanted him to have it. Damien said nothing. The silence stretched between them, and he watched her sit inside it without trying to fill it, and he understood that she was good at this, at waiting, at not yielding ground to silence, and that she had been practicing this particular conversation for longer than he had. "He's 7, Damien said. "Yes." "How old?" "7. Her eyes didn't move. "You already did the math. Don't insult either of us by asking me to do it for you." He leaned back in his chair. His hand throbbed faintly under the bandage. "I want a DNA test," he said. The composure she'd assembled so carefully developed a single crack, small and fast, there and gone. She picked up her coffee cup, put it back down without drinking from it. "And if I say no, then I'll find another way. I'd rather not." "That sounds like a threat." "It's not. I'm telling you what happens if there's no agreement." He kept his voice even. "I don't want to be your enemy, Claire. I don't have any reason to. But I need to know." She was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, Harbor Street was doing its mid-morning business. A mail truck double-parked, 2 women with strollers navigating around a planter, a teenager on a bike cutting too close to the curb. "You think knowing changes something?" she said finally. Not a question. "I think it changes everything." "That's what I'm afraid of." She stood up. She picked up the empty cups from the table. Her hands, he noticed, were steady. "I'll think about it." She went back behind the counter. He left $3 under the thermos and went out into the gray November morning. He thought about Portland and let the thought pass. Rourke could wait. The name on the list could wait. Everything that had occupied the architecture of his life for 15 years could recede for a few more days against the weight of the question that had installed itself in his chest the moment he saw that compass hanging around a 7-year-old boy's neck. He was staying at a motel called the Harbor Inn on the edge of town, a 2-story cinder block situation that had clearly once been something better. His room smelled of industrial cleaner and the previous occupant's cigarettes, and the salt coming off the water 2 blocks east. He slept badly, the way he always slept in unfamiliar places, in intervals, surfacing regularly to catalog the sounds of the building and dismiss them. He called Marcus on the 3rd morning. Marcus Ewell had been his right hand for 9 years, a man who operated with the complete emotional neutrality of someone who'd made his peace with what he did and arrived at a functional tranquility about it that Damien had always privately envied. Marcus did not ask questions beyond what was necessary. He understood that information had value and should not be distributed without purpose. "I need something," Damien said. "Quiet." "Quiet as in careful, or quiet as in it doesn't exist?" "The second one." He thought for a moment. "I need access to a private medical facility, DNA testing, no record trail." Marcus was quiet for a moment on the other end. Not processing. Marcus processed fast, deciding how to frame the thing he was going to say. "You're going to tell me this is personal," Marcus said. "It's personal." "And the situation in Portland." "Tell Rourke I'm delayed. Don't tell him anything else. Rourke is not a patient man." "Then he'll have to become one." Damien ended the call. He drove to Evan's school that afternoon and parked on the street 2 blocks away, and sat there feeling like something he would not have named aloud. Watching parents arrive in their cars, watching kids pour out through the double doors at 3 o'clock, watching the specific texture of ordinary life that he had navigated around for so long, it had become theoretical to him. Birthday parties and carpools, and the kind of argument about homework that was really an argument about love. He didn't see Evan. The boy must have taken a different route. He drove back to the motel. He sat on the edge of the bed in the gray afternoon light and looked at his bandaged hand and thought about a night 8 years ago. Not quite 8, 7, and some months. In a rented apartment 2 states away, Claire's back against the window, his own voice doing something it didn't often do, which was ask a question he already knew he couldn't answer honestly. "What do you want this to be?" Her face, the particular quality of silence that had followed, which had told him more than any answer could. He had told himself, afterward, that she had chosen to leave, that she had weighed the cost of a life adjacent to his and made a rational calculation and executed it cleanly. He had respected that. He had resented it. He had done what he always did with things he couldn't resolve, which was build a wall around the room they lived in and stop going into that room. Now the room had a door in it he hadn't known was there. Marcus called back at 9 that evening with a name and an address. A private clinic outside of Burlington, a 2-hour drive, a doctor who asked no questions and kept records that existed only in a physical file cabinet that Marcus had personal knowledge of. "I'll need a sample from the subject," the doctor had told Marcus, "and I'll need it handled correctly, or the test is useless." Damien lay back on the motel bed with the phone on his chest and looked at the water-stained ceiling and thought about how he was going to ask Claire for a DNA sample from her son without destroying whatever fragile and unnamed arrangement had allowed him to keep sitting in her bookstore drinking cold coffee. His phone lit up with a call from an unlisted number. He stared at it for 3 rings. It wasn't Marcus's encrypted line. It wasn't any number he recognized. He answered, silence on the other end. Not empty silence. Occupied silence, the kind that has someone sitting inside it, deciding whether to speak. Then a voice, old, careful, and completely familiar. "Damien." His uncle's voice dry as paper. "I hear you've made a friend in Ashridge." The room dropped about 10 degrees. "How long have you known I was here?" Damien said. His voice came out level. He was proud of that. "Long enough." A pause, comfortable and deliberate, the pause of a man who is accustomed to holding rooms. "Come home, nephew. Whatever you're looking for in that little town, I promise you it isn't there." Damien sat up slowly. He said nothing. "The plane can be ready by morning," Vincent said. "I'll think about it," Damien said, and ended the call. He sat in the dark of the motel room with the phone in his hand, and the specific cold certainty of a man who has just understood that what he thought was a private matter has been visible to someone else for longer than he knew. Vincent Cross did not make calls like this out of concern. Vincent Cross made calls like this the way a chess player picks up a piece, to move it somewhere he'd already decided it needed to go. He thought about the compass. He thought about a 7-year-old boy running into traffic. He thought about Claire's face when she'd sat down across from him and put her hands flat on the table. He thought about everything Vincent might know and everything Vincent might have done with what he knew. He put the phone face down on the nightstand and pulled on his jacket and walked out into the cold night air and stood in the motel parking lot looking at the dark water at the end of the street. In the morning, he would go to the bookstore. He would tell Claire that the test needed to happen quickly, and he would tell her why, and he would watch her face and determine from that face how much she already understood about the danger that had just arrived at both their doors wearing his family's name. He stood in the parking lot for a long time, the harbor wind cutting through his jacket, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Damien Cross had no protocol for what came next. Damien was back at the bookstore by 8 in the morning. Claire wasn't open yet. The sign in the door still read "Closed," and the lights in the front of the store were off, but there was movement in the back. A lamp on somewhere behind the shelves, the shadow of someone crossing between the stacks. He knocked, not loud. Once. 30 seconds. Then the lock turned. She looked at him through the gap. She'd been up for a while, dressed, hair back, coffee in her hand, but the particular stillness around her eyes told him she hadn't slept well either. She looked at his face, and something in her own face went careful. "It's early," she said. "I know. We need to talk." "I said I'd think about it." "That was before last night." He held her gaze. "Let me in, Claire." She stood aside. He came in and she locked the door behind him and followed him to the back of the store, to the small, cluttered office that had a desk and 2 chairs and a space heater that ticked irregularly and made the room smell of warm dust. She didn't offer to sit, neither did he. "Someone knows I'm here," he said. "My uncle called me last night." She set her coffee mug down on the desk with a precision that told him she was controlling something. "Vincent," she said. The word landed flat between them. Just the name, with no inflection, no question mark, no surprise. And that told Damien more than a paragraph would have. "You know him," he said. "I know who he is?" "How?" She picked up her mug again and turned it in both hands without drinking from it. "About 4 years ago, a man came to see me. Said he worked for a law firm in Boston. Said there was an estate matter, that someone wanted to make sure I was financially stable, that there was an account set up and I didn't need to do anything, just acknowledge the arrangement. And you. I told him to get out of my store. Her voice was level. I took a picture of him on my phone and I looked up the license plate on the car he drove. The firm didn't exist. The plate traced back to a leasing company in Delaware that had no public record of clients. Damien looked at her. You did that yourself. I have a son. She finally drank from the mug. I was alone and I had a 700-square-foot apartment above a bookstore and a 3-year-old and I was alone. I needed to know what I was dealing with. And what did you decide you were dealing with? Her eyes came up to his, steady. Someone who wanted to make sure I stayed quiet and stayed away and didn't cause a problem. Someone who knew that money would be insulting, so they dressed it up as charity. She set the mug down again. I changed my phone number. I moved the store's business address to a P.O. box. I told Maya if a man in a good suit ever came in asking questions to take down everything she could and call me immediately. You never called me. You didn't exist, she said. You were a chapter I'd closed. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. The heater ticked. Outside, Harbor Street was waking up. The first truck of the morning, a dog barking 1 block over. The DNA test, he said. I need it to happen quickly, today if possible. Her jaw set. Today. Vincent doesn't make social calls, Claire. He called to tell me he knew exactly where I was, and he wanted me to feel that. He wanted me to know I was visible. Damien kept his voice quiet. Whatever he's been managing for the last 7 years, whatever arrangements he has in place, they're in jeopardy now that I'm here. He doesn't like things in jeopardy. So you're telling me my son is in danger? I'm telling you I don't know yet, and I need to know before I can figure out what comes next. The silence in the office had a different texture than the silences before. This one had weight. He's upstairs asleep, she said. I'm not waking him up to swab his cheek because you had a phone call. Then tonight, after school. She studied him for a long moment, and he stood inside that gaze and let her run whatever calculation she needed to run. You tell him it's a doctor thing, she said. You don't explain it. I do the talking. Fine. And if this test comes back with a result I don't like, Damien, I need you to understand that a piece of paper doesn't make you his father. 7 years makes you his father. Showing up does. Being there at 3 a.m. when he has a fever makes you his father. I know that. Do you? Yes. He held her eyes. I'm not here to take anything from you. I just need to know what's true. She was quiet for another moment, and then she turned away and picked up a box of books from the desk and said, I open at 9. You should go. He went. He drove to the north end of town and parked on the overlook above the harbor and called Marcus. Vincent called me, he said when Marcus picked up. A beat. When? Last night, 9:15. Unlisted number. He knew where I was. He knew the town by name. Then someone's been watching you since you left. Marcus's voice had the tone it got when he was already running solutions in parallel with the conversation. Not local. Local surveillance doesn't get that information to Vincent in real time. Someone in your travel chain. Or yours. Another beat, longer this time. I'm careful, Marcus said. Everybody's careful until they're not. Damien looked out at the water. The harbor was flat and gray, a fishing boat moving toward the breakwater, its running lights still on in the morning mist. I need you to run a quiet check on everyone who knew I was coming up this way. Portland, Seattle, the whole itinerary. Anyone who could have known the detour. That's a short list. Then it should be quick. And the other matter. Still happening, tonight. He paused. Fast-track the analysis, whatever it costs. Understood. Marcus paused. Damien, you want me to come up there? Not yet. Vincent has people everywhere between here and New England. I know where Vincent has people. He ended the call. He sat on the overlook for a while. The boat cleared the breakwater and moved toward open water and diminished until it was a dark shape against the gray, and then just the gray. He thought about Vincent Cross, his mother's older brother, who had run the family's operations for 30 years before Damien was old enough to understand what the operations were, who had been, for the first 20 years of Damien's life, the clearest model he had for what a man was supposed to be. Controlled, precise, respected in the specific way power makes people respect you, which is really fear with a coat of varnish on it. Who had taken a 22-year-old with a dead father and an instinct for order and built him into something the family could use. Who had apparently spent 7 years managing a secret that wasn't his to manage. Damien's hand tightened on the steering wheel until the bandaged palm lit up with pain, and he made himself release it. He needed the test. He needed proof. Because if the test said what he believed it was going to say, then everything that followed needed to be built on something solid, and feelings were not solid. And the particular hollow rage currently occupying his chest was not solid. He drove back toward town and found a hardware store 2 streets off Harbor and bought a bolt lock and installed it himself on Claire's side entrance that afternoon, while she watched from 3 feet away with her arms crossed. "I didn't ask for that," she said. "The one you have is a joke. A teenager with a credit card could open it." He tightened the last screw. "This one won't stop someone determined, but it'll slow them down and give you noise. You need noise." She looked at the lock. She looked at him. "You're afraid," she said. "I'm careful." He pocketed the screwdriver. "That's what afraid looks like on you, isn't it? It doesn't go in your face. It goes in your hands." He didn't answer that. He tested the lock twice and went back through the store and out the front, and stood on the sidewalk and looked at the street with the particular attention of someone mapping thread angles, entry points, sight lines. The building across was 3 stories of commercial space, ground floor insurance office. Upper floors looked residential. The alley to the left was a dead end. The one to the right opened onto the parallel street and had enough foot traffic to be moderately safe. He was still standing there when Evan came around the corner from school. The boy saw him and stopped. Then he walked up. "You're here again," Evan said. "Yeah." Evan looked at the street. "Are you a friend of my mom's?" "Something like that." "She doesn't really have friends that are men." He said it with the uncomplicated directness of a child reporting weather. "She has Maya and Dr. Okafor from down the street and Mrs. Tanaka from the library. That's mostly it." Damien crouched down to the boy's level. This was something he'd been trained not to do. Literally trained, early on, by a man who told him that the posture of equality was a weakness that invited exploitation. He did it anyway. "What's that?" He nodded toward the compass, which had escaped from Evan's jacket collar. The boy picked it up and looked at it. "A compass. My mom gave it to me for my birthday." "Which birthday?" "My 5th. But she says it's older than that. She says it's been in the world longer than I have." He considered this. "I think about that sometimes. That things exist before you do." Damien looked at the compass in the boy's hand. Worn silver, the cord dark with use, the face of it scratched from 100 small impacts. He'd bought it in a shop in Providence, from a man with white hair and a magnifying loupe pushed up on his forehead. He'd paid $60 for it and had felt the whole time like he was doing something either very right or very stupid. "Do you know how it works?" he said. Evan looked at him like this was possibly the least intelligent question he'd ever been asked. "The needle points north. It's magnetized. The Earth has a magnetic field." "Right. My teacher says most people don't use them anymore because of GPS." He tucked the compass back under his collar. "But my mom says there are places GPS doesn't work. She says if you know how to read a compass, you always know how to get home." Damien stood back up. His knee popped. He was 35 years old and felt it differently than he used to. "That's a good thing to know," he said. Evan shrugged with the terrific indifference of 7-year-olds and went inside to his mother. The clinic was quiet at 7 in the evening, which was why Marcus had selected it. A converted Victorian house on a side street with a discreet sign and a doctor named Patel who had a careful handshake and eyes that measured people in a way that suggested he'd made decisions like this before and been all right with himself afterward. Claire sat in the waiting room with Evan while Damien spoke to Patel in the corridor. The conversation was 3 minutes long. Patel asked no questions about the circumstances. He explained the chain of custody, the timeline, 72 hours for the standard panel, faster if the priority flag was used, and the physical file protocol that Marcus had already briefed him on. "No digital copies," Damien said. "Understood. And no contact with anyone regarding this case unless it comes from this number. He gave Patel Marcus's clean line. Back in the waiting room, Claire explained to Evan that it was a quick health check and the doctor needed a small sample, like a blood test, but easier, just a swab. Evan accepted this with the pragmatic cooperation of a child accustomed to his mother's instructions carrying weight. He opened his mouth when asked, and the whole thing was over in 40 seconds. Claire didn't look at Damien once during the procedure. On the drive back to Ashridge, he followed her, not planning to, just doing it, and neither of them acknowledged it. Evan fell asleep in the back seat of her car. Damien could see him through the window when they stopped at lights. The compass was visible at his collar, catching the streetlight. He pulled over 2 blocks from the bookstore when Claire's car stopped. She got out and opened the back door and carefully lifted Evan, who was 6 years past the age when children are usually carried, but who had gone completely limp with sleep in the way that removes all argument. She adjusted him against her shoulder and looked at Damien across the roof of the car. 72 hours, she said. Could be faster. She nodded. She started toward the side entrance. She stopped. He asked me about you tonight, she said. Before dinner, he asked why you keep coming to the store. Damien waited. I told him you were someone I used to know. Her back was still to him. Evan's face was turned against her shoulder. He asked if you were a good person. What did you say? She turned enough to look at him. I told him I was still figuring that out. She shifted Evan's weight. Get some sleep, Damien. You look terrible. She went inside. The new lock caught with a solid sound. He stood on the empty street for a moment and then got back in his car and drove to the motel. The call came on the second morning, not from Patel, not from Marcus. It came from a number he recognized this time, a local Ashridge number, the bookstore's landline, at 6:47 in the morning, and Claire's voice when he answered was stripped of everything except information. Someone was in the store last night, she said. He was already sitting up, feet on the floor. How do you know? The display table by the front window. I arrange it a certain way every night. I know it sounds small, but I do it the same way every time. It's a habit. And this morning it's different. Small things. 3 books moved. The coffee station rotated about 4 inches. Her voice was very controlled. Whoever it was knew what they were doing. Most people wouldn't notice. But you noticed. I notice everything in this store. Did they go upstairs? A pause. The door to the apartment from the inside is a different lock. It wasn't touched. I checked. He was already pulling on his jacket. Don't touch anything. I'm coming. Damien. Her voice stopped him. My laptop was open on the desk. I closed it before I went up last night. It's open again. He thought about what was on that laptop. Business records, correspondence, personal files, things a careful person would want to look through if they were building a picture of someone's life. 15 minutes, he said. He was there in 9. She let him in and he moved through the store without speaking, reading the space the way he'd been trained to read spaces. She was right about the table and the coffee station. There were 2 other things she hadn't mentioned. A window latch in the back office that had been engaged from inside, which meant the entry had been through that window and the latch reset as the person left, which took a level of care that was professional, and a faint compression mark on the carpet near the filing cabinet that the cabinet's own feet didn't account for. They were looking for something, he said. Or looking at something. She was standing in the office doorway. What was on your phone when you called me yesterday about the test? He turned to look at her. Someone is moving fast, she said. The test happened last night. This happened last night. She said it without accusation, but her eyes held the question steady. Either you told someone, or you didn't, and they already knew. I told no one about the test except Marcus, and Marcus made the arrangement. So it's Marcus. I don't know that yet. You should know who you trust. I do. But even as he said it, Marcus's voice from the call yesterday moved through his memory, someone in your travel chain, and the flat professionalism of it, which had always been a quality Damien valued, sat slightly differently now. He pulled out his phone. He stared at it for a moment without calling. The clinic, he said. Who knew which clinic? Patel keeps a physical file only. You said that. I said that's what I requested. He paused. There's a difference. He called Marcus. The phone rang 6 times. Went to the encrypted voicemail. He called again. 6 rings. Voicemail. A thin, cold thing moved through him. Marcus always answered. In 9 years, Marcus had answered every call, every time, including twice from hospital beds and once from the back of a moving vehicle in circumstances that made calling inadvisable. Marcus answered. He called a 3rd time. On the 4th ring, someone answered, not Marcus. A man's voice, unhurried and precise. Mr. Cross, Marcus asked me to let you know he'll be out of contact for a while. The cold thing became something else. Who is this? Damien said. Someone your uncle asked to make sure things stay organized. A pause. You should come home, Mr. Cross. Truly, whatever is in that town, it's not worth what you're risking. Damien ended the call. He stood in the office doorway and looked at Claire, and she looked back at him, and he understood from her face that she'd read enough of what had just happened from his expression to know it wasn't good. Marcus, he said, my right hand, 9 years. She said nothing. They have him, or he's with them. I don't know which yet. He put the phone in his pocket. His hand was very still. Which means they know about the test. They know about the clinic. They know I was there last night. The results, she said. If they moved fast enough, if they had someone near Burlington who could get to Patel last night, can they make the results disappear? He looked at her. These people make things disappear for a living. Yes. She sat down in the desk chair slowly, like the weight of it had just become real. Evan's backpack was on the floor beside the desk, the dinosaur library book visible in the open top. She looked at it for a moment. Tell me what this means, she said. Tell me what actually happens next, not the version that makes me feel better. He pulled the other chair over and sat across from her, elbows on his knees, speaking quietly and without softening it. My uncle has run the family's organization for 30 years. He built me. I'm not using that as an excuse, it's just the fact. He needed me controllable. A man with a son, with a legitimate heir and a reason outside the business, is less controllable. So he made that son not exist. He watched her face. He separated us. He ensured I never knew. He's been managing the situation for 7 years. Managing it how far? I don't know yet. The man who came to see me 4 years ago. One way to manage it. What are the other ways? He didn't answer immediately, and in the silence she understood something, and her face went very still. If that result comes back confirmed, she said, and her voice had gone flat and careful the way voices go when the body is keeping a person together from the outside, what does it mean for Evan? It means he's my heir, the family's heir. It means Vincent has even more reason to want the situation contained. Contained? She said the word back to him like she was examining it. Claire, don't. She stood up. Don't manage this for me. Tell me what contained means. He looked at her. It means they won't let a confirmed result exist. And it means anyone the result matters to is a variable that needs to be addressed. The room was very quiet. She reached out and picked up Evan's backpack from the floor and held it against her chest with both arms, the way she'd held the boy himself on the sidewalk after the truck. And she looked at Damien Cross with an expression that he would not be able to name afterward. Not fear, not anger, something beneath both of those. Some bedrock thing that people only reach when everything above it has been stripped away. The test results, she said. Can you still get them before they do? Possibly. If Patel hasn't been reached, then you need to go. Right now. Tonight. She set the backpack down. And when you come back, if you come back, she stopped. Started again. He goes to school in the morning, normal. Nothing changes for him. Promise me that. Nothing changes for him. Say it like you mean it. Nothing changes for him, Claire. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, measuring him, and then she nodded once and stepped back. He was out the door and in his car in 90 seconds, pulling onto Harbor Street in the early morning dark, pushing the car north toward Burlington, toward a small clinic in a Victorian house where a physical file sat in a cabinet and a doctor named Patel either had or hadn't yet received a visit from someone Vincent Cross had dispatched the night before. His phone showed 4 missed calls from an unlisted number. He didn't answer them. He turned the phone over on the passenger seat and drove. 80 miles north, in the parking lot of the clinic on the side street, he found Marcus Ewell's car, empty, parked at an angle like it had stopped quickly. The driver's door was unlocked. Marcus's phone was on the seat, cracked screen, the call log open to Damien's number. He stood beside the car in the cold and looked at the clinic's front door and understood, with the particular clarity that comes when the last possibility of a mistake disappears, that he was no longer navigating a personal crisis. He was navigating a war. And the person who had started it was someone who knew everything about how he fought. He walked toward the clinic door and put his hand on the latch and pushed it open and stepped inside into the silence. And what he found in the physical file room at the back of that clinic was a filing cabinet standing open, the drawer pulled all the way out, the hanging folders inside rifled and reordered with the careless speed of someone who'd been moving fast. Patel's office chair was knocked back against the wall. A coffee mug lay on its side on the desk, the spill long dried to a dark ring on the wood. No Patel, no file. Damien stood in the doorway and looked at the room and breathed through his nose and did not move for 10 seconds. The file was gone. The physical copy, the only copy, the thing he'd built the entire arrangement around, gone. Whoever Vincent had sent had moved inside of 48 hours with a speed that meant the resources behind it were not improvised. This had been a contingency plan already assembled and waiting for exactly this moment. He checked the back room, a storage closet, a half bath, empty. He found Patel in the small kitchenette at the end of the hall, sitting on the floor against the cabinet with his wrists zip-tied in front of him and a bruise coming up dark on his left cheekbone. Alive. Breathing in shallow pulls, eyes tracking when Damien crouched in front of him. "The file," Damien said. Patel's jaw moved. "2 men. 40 minutes ago. I know. The file. Did they get everything?" Patel looked at him, and something moved behind the pain in his eyes. Something deliberate. "I processed the sample last night," Patel said quietly. "I ran it early. The result is in the file they took." He paused. "It's also in my head. I read it myself." Damien waited. Patel looked at him steadily. "The boy is yours," he said. "Paternity confirmed at 99.998%. The kitchenette was very small and very quiet, and the fluorescent light above them buzzed faintly at a frequency that Damien would remember for the rest of his life. He cut the zip ties with his knife. He helped Patel to his feet. He told him to call the police, to report a break-in and an assault, to say nothing about the DNA test or the names involved, and to leave town for 2 weeks if he had family somewhere he could go. He walked back out to the parking lot. He stood beside Marcus's empty car with the cold air off the Vermont fields cutting through his jacket, and he held the fact inside his chest, the confirmed, irrevocable, already stolen fact, and felt it change the weight of everything. Evan was his son. And Vincent Cross had known it for 7 years, had buried it for 7 years, and had now destroyed the only clinical proof in existence. Damien got in his car and turned it south toward Ashridge and pressed the accelerator down, and the thing that had been cold and careful inside him all morning finished its last transformation into something that had no interest in being managed. He was done being managed. He drove the 80 miles back to Ashridge without stopping and without music and without the radio, just the sound of the engine, the tires on wet asphalt, and the specific quality of silence that exists inside a man who has just had the last variable resolved. Evan was his son. He said it once, aloud, in the car, just to hear what it sounded like in the air outside his own head. It sounded like something that had always been true and had simply been waiting for him to catch up to it. Then he put it away. Not because it didn't matter. It mattered more than anything he'd held in 15 years. But because the part of him that had kept him alive this long understood that you don't operate on emotion, you operate on sequence. What is the situation? What are the variables? What moves first? The situation. Vincent had the file. Vincent had Marcus, or Marcus had gone to Vincent willingly, and Damien still didn't know which and needed to. Vincent had people in Ashridge or could have them there within hours. The DNA result existed now only in Patel's memory and in Damien's knowledge of what Patel had said, neither of which would hold up to any formal challenge. The variables. Claire didn't know yet. Evan was at school. The new lock on the side entrance bought noise, but not time. What moves first? Claire. He parked on the side street and was through the bookstore's front door at 9:43 in the morning. 2 customers browsing the fiction wall. Maya behind the counter, 19 years old, currently looking at him with the particular wariness of someone who had been briefed. "She's in the back," Maya said. Then, lower. "She told me to call her the second you came in." "Don't bother," he said. "I'll find her." Yixia. Claire was in the office, on the phone, and she ended the call the moment he appeared in the doorway. She read his face. "They got the file," she said. "Yes." "And Patel?" "He's alive, shaken. He'll be all right." He came in and closed the door. "But he ran the test early. He had the result." She went very still. "Evan is mine," Damien said. "Confirmed." The room was quiet for 5 seconds. Claire sat at the desk with her hands in her lap and looked at the middle distance, and he watched something move through her that was too complex to name. Not surprised, because he understood now that she had always known, but the particular weight of a truth that has been carried alone for 7 years finally becoming shared, which is its own kind of grief, even when it's also a relief. She breathed out slowly. "Okay," she said. "Just that. The result doesn't exist on paper anymore. They destroyed it. Can we redo the test?" "Not fast enough, and Patel is compromised now. If we go back to him, we lead them back to him again." He sat down. "I need to find Marcus. I need to know whether he was taken or whether he walked." "Does it change anything? What you do next?" "It changes what I know about the perimeter of who I can trust." She looked at him. "Who do you have left?" "Besides Marcus." He thought about it honestly. 2 people. Maybe 3. People Vincent doesn't know I know. "Maybe 3, she repeated. "In this situation, maybe 3 is more than most people get." She accepted this without arguing, which told him she understood the world he was describing better than he'd given her credit for. She pulled open the desk drawer and took out a small device, a USB drive on a plain lanyard, and set it on the desk between them. "4 years ago," she said, "after the man in the suit came to see me, I started keeping records. Everything I could find about Vincent Cross. Public records, corporate filings, anything that was accessible if you knew how to look." She pushed the drive toward him. "I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an investigator, but I've had 4 years and I'm thorough, and I was angry." He looked at the drive without touching it yet. "What's on it?" he said. "Shell companies. 11 of them, traceable to a holding group in the Caymans that traces back to a real estate trust that Vincent controls directly. A paper trail for the bribery payment that made our separation happen. It went through a law firm in Hartford that doesn't exist anymore, but whose dissolution filing I found in the Connecticut State Archive." She paused. "And a recording." He looked up. "The man who came to see me 4 years ago. I told you I took his photo, traced the plate." She held his gaze. "I also left my phone recording on the counter the entire time he was in the store. The audio is degraded, but it's usable." He references Vincent by name twice. He says the arrangement has been in place since before the child was born. She let that sit. "I've had that recording for 4 years, Damien. I've been deciding what to do with it for 4 years. He picked up the drive. "Why didn't you use it?" he said. "Use it how? Go to the police with a recording that proves a powerful man tried to pay me off. With what backing? With what protection?" Her voice didn't rise, but the edges of it sharpened. "I have a child. I made the calculation that the safest thing was to be boring and small and not worth the effort, so I stayed boring and small, and I kept the record in case that ever stopped being enough." He turned the drive over in his hand. "It stopped being enough," he said. "Yes." She folded her hands on the desk. "It stopped being enough the morning you walked into traffic after my son." He pocketed the drive. He stood up. He was already building the sequence in his head. The drive to a secure device. The encrypted transfer to the one contact he had outside Marcus's knowledge. A lawyer in Philadelphia named Sorensen who owed him a debt of the kind that outlasts convenience. He was halfway to the office door when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not Vincent's unlisted line. A different unknown with a Vermont area code. He answered, "Mr. Cross?" A woman's voice. Young, professional, the clipped neutrality of someone delivering information they've been paid to deliver without editorial comment. "My name is Agent Dana Reyes, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Field Office, Burlington. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience regarding Marcus Ewell and an ongoing investigation into the financial structure of Cross Holdings." Damien stood in the doorway of the office and did not move. "Mr. Cross?" "I'm here," he said. "We've been in contact with Mr. Ewell over the past 72 hours. He has provided us with a significant volume of documentation regarding the organization's operations. He has also indicated that you may be in a position to corroborate certain elements of his account." A pause, precise and practiced. "We're not approaching you as a subject at this time, Mr. Cross. We're approaching you as a potential cooperating witness." The floor did not move. That was the strange thing. The floor felt completely solid under his feet while everything above it rearranged itself. Marcus. 72 hours. The FBI had Marcus for 72 hours before the phone call where Marcus had told him someone in his travel chain might be watching, before the clinic arrangement, before the break-in, before all of it. "I need 24 hours, Damien said. "I can give you 12, Reyes said. "After that, the nature of our approach may change." 12 is fine, he ended the call. He turned back to Claire. She had heard enough of it, his end, his silences, the way his body had gone completely motionless, to know. "Marcus," she said, "he's been cooperating with the FBI for 3 days. He heard his own voice, level and remote, the voice he used in rooms where he couldn't afford to be a person. He was the leak, not because Vincent flipped him, because the FBI did. He was building a case. Against Vincent. Against all of us." He paused. "Against me." She stood up from the desk. "Can they—" "Yes," he said before she finished. "If Marcus has been documenting for any length of time, they have enough. The question is what he gave them and what he held back and why he's sending them to me now instead of letting them take me on his timetable." He moved to the office window. The alley below was empty. A cat on the dumpster lid. A newspaper folded and sodden against the wall. He thought about Marcus. 9 years. Every hard call, every contingency, every room where the outcome had been uncertain. Marcus answering every call from hospital beds and moving vehicles. Marcus, who had assembled the clinic arrangement in 12 hours and called it quiet. Marcus, who had been talking to federal agents for 72 hours while all of it was happening. He thought about what a man cooperating with federal investigators would need to hand over to be credible. Operational records, financial structures, names, locations, methods. And in the middle of all that, a side trip to a coastal town in Maine to retrieve a DNA file from a private clinic. Because a cooperating witness who is also building the evidentiary record needs to make sure the evidence points in the right directions. The file. He turned around. "The FBI doesn't have the file," he said. "Vincent's people got to it first, which means Marcus didn't tell them about the test, or told them after Vincent's people were already moving." He was thinking out loud now, building it as he spoke. Marcus is playing both ends. He's cooperating with the Bureau, and he is still feeding Vincent, which means neither side has the complete picture, and Marcus is the only person who holds both. Claire was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "What does that mean for us?" she said. "It means Marcus is the most dangerous person in this situation. More dangerous than Vincent, more dangerous than the FBI, because he has the leverage to destroy us from either direction and the judgment to choose his moment." She sat back down. She picked up her coffee mug. Empty, he could tell by the weight of how she held it, but she held it anyway, something to do with her hands. "My recording," she said. "The drive. It's the only uncontaminated piece of evidence we have. Marcus didn't know about it. Vincent's people didn't search for it. The FBI doesn't know it exists." He paused. "It needs to go somewhere none of them can reach before the 12 hours are up." "Your lawyer." "Sorensen, Philadelphia." He pulled out his phone, then stopped. Every device he owned that Marcus had ever had access to was potentially compromised. His encrypted line, his backup, his laptop. 9 years of access meant 9 years of opportunity to install the kind of software that didn't announce itself. He looked at Claire. "Your phone," he said. "Has Marcus ever had contact with you?" "Never." "Has anyone connected to me ever had your number?" "No, I made sure of that." He held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then unlocked her phone and handed it to him. He dialed Sorensen's office number from memory. It rang twice. "Sorensen Legal." "Tell him it's the fishing buddy from Providence," Damien said. "Tell him I need a secure channel in the next hour, and I'm sending him something that needs to live in a vault." 30 seconds of hold. Then Sorensen's voice, graveled and unhurried, the voice of a man who had been in difficult rooms and was no longer surprised by them. "You have the worst timing of anyone I've ever had the misfortune to like. I need you to receive a file and hold it under attorney-client privilege. It doesn't get opened. It doesn't get copied. It doesn't get acknowledged to anyone until I tell you otherwise." "Is this the kind of thing that eventually ends up in front of a grand jury?" "Possibly." "Is the file legitimately obtained?" "Every piece of it." A pause. "Send it to the secure upload on my site. Passcode is the name of the boat." He remembered the boat. He ended the call and handed Claire back her phone and told her the upload address and watched her navigate to it on her phone and transfer the drive's contents through the store's Wi-Fi while he stood at the office window watching the alley. It took 4 minutes. She confirmed the upload complete, and he told her to delete the transfer history, and she did it without being asked twice. "Now what?" she said. The question landed, and he held it and thought about the FBI agent waiting for a call back, and Vincent, who had the destroyed file, and Marcus and 9 years of operational knowledge, and Marcus himself somewhere in the middle of all of it running his own calculation. And then the store's front bell rang. Not a customer. He knew it wasn't a customer from the way Maya's voice out front went up a half register, asking if she could help someone, and the response that came back was male and brief and carried the specific flat authority of someone who wasn't there to browse. He looked at Claire. She was already on her feet. "The back window," she said quietly. "There's a fire escape." "I'm not running." He picked up his phone, compromised, but he needed to look like a normal person, and straightened his jacket. "Damien? Stay here. Whatever they ask you, you met me when I pulled Evan out of traffic. That's it. That's the whole story." He held her gaze. "Don't volunteer. Don't explain. Just the truck and the boy and the sidewalk." She looked like she had things she wanted to say and was making the decision not to say them, which was its own kind of trust. He walked out of the office and through the store. There were 2 of them. Plain clothes, the particular fit of jackets over holsters, standing at the front of the store with the patient stillness of people who are prepared to wait as long as necessary. The shorter one had a badge out before Damien reached them. "Damien Cross." Not a question. "Yes." "Agent Reyes asked us to collect you." The badge said FBI. She moved the timeline up. He looked at the badge. He looked at the door. Maya behind the counter was holding a book she wasn't reading with both hands. "I need to make one call," he said. "You can make it at the field office." "I need to make it now." The taller agent looked at the shorter one. Something passed between them. "One call," the shorter one said. "Here, we watch you make it." He pulled out his phone and dialed the number he'd been composing in his head since he walked out of the office. It rang once. The voice that answered was not one he'd called in 3 years. A man named Carver who ran a private security outfit in Boston that had historically maintained a careful distance from both Damien's organization and law enforcement, a distance that constituted its primary value. "I need a perimeter on a bookstore in Ashridge, Maine," Damien said. "Holloway's, Harbor Street. Mother and a 7-year-old boy. Starting immediately. Duration. Until I tell you otherwise. Rate is double for open-ended." "Fine." He ended the call and put his phone in his pocket and looked at the 2 agents. "Okay," he said. They walked him out through the front door, and the bell above it rang, and he stepped into the gray November morning and got into the back of a black sedan that smelled of coffee and vinyl, and he looked out the window as they pulled away and saw Claire standing in the bookstore's window, Evan beside her. The boy must have come home for lunch, Damien realized, must have come in the back while he was on the phone. And Evan had his hand pressed flat against the glass the way kids do, watching the car leave, and the compass was visible at his collar, catching what pale light the morning offered. The sedan turned left onto the main road north, and the bookstore disappeared behind the corner, and Damian Cross sat in the back of a federal vehicle with no phone access and no lawyer, and 12 years of operational exposure in Marcus Ewell's memory, and a confirmed paternity that existed now only in the word of a man with a bruised face in a Vermont kitchen, and understood with complete and terrible clarity that every structure he'd spent 15 years building had just been used against him, and that the person who had engineered the entire sequence, who had managed the separation and the silence and the file in the FBI's timeline, was not Vincent Cross at all. It was Marcus. Marcus, who had been Vincent's man from the beginning. Marcus, who had spent 9 years inside Damian's organization, not as a right hand, but as a long play insertion, feeding Vincent everything, every plan, every contact, every vulnerability, while presenting himself as the most reliable person Damian had ever trusted. 9 years. The sedan moved north through the coastal town, and Damian sat with his hands on his knees and the cold settling into the specific place behind his sternum where certainty lives. And he thought about Evan's hand against the glass, and he thought about Claire's face in the window, and he thought about the 12 hours that had just become however long a federal interview lasted. And he understood that when he came out the other side of whatever room Agent Reyes had prepared, Vincent Cross would have completed whatever move he'd been building toward since the phone call 3 nights ago in a motel room that smelled of cigarettes and harbor salt. And Claire and Evan would be the pieces Vincent moved to close the game, because that was how Vincent had always operated. And Damian had spent 9 years being too close to Marcus to see it clearly. And now the distance had been created for him, violently and completely. And there was nothing left to do but sit in the back of the car and let the distance do its work, and be ready for what came after. The town fell away behind them. The road opened up into gray fields and bare November trees, and Damian Cross looked straight ahead and began, with the cold and methodical precision of a man who has lost everything once before and survived it, to build the only plan that had any chance of working, one that required him to do the thing he had spent 15 years avoiding, which was to walk into a federal office and tell the truth, not for himself, but for the 2 people he'd just left standing in a window on Harbor Street, and to do it fast enough that Vincent Cross, who was already moving, did not arrive at that bookstore first. The federal field office in Burlington was a 4-story building that smelled of recycled air and burnt coffee and the specific institutional neutrality of a place designed to make people feel that their individual situation is unremarkable. They put him in a room with a table and 2 chairs and a mirror that wasn't trying very hard to look like anything other than what it was. And they left him there for 22 minutes, which he understood was a technique and which he used to finish building the architecture of what he was about to do. Agent Reyes was younger than her voice, early 30s, dark hair pulled back with the efficiency of someone who considered it a variable to be managed, a stillness about her that was professional rather than natural. She sat across from him with a legal pad and a pen she didn't use and a tablet face down on the table between them. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I didn't have a lot of choice." "You had some." She looked at him with the direct measuring quality of someone who has interviewed a great many people and developed opinions about what honesty looks like from across a table. "You could have run. You didn't. I have things to handle here." The woman and the boy. She said it flat, no implication, just information she already held. "We know about the bookstore, Mr. Cross. We know about the clinic. We know why you've been in Ashridge." "Then you know more than you're supposed to." "Marcus Ewell is a thorough man." She paused. "He told us about the paternity test. He told us about the file retrieval. He told us about the clinic break-in, which he also arranged." Damian kept his face still. "He told us about Vincent Cross's instruction to retrieve and destroy the test results. He documented the instruction, the timeline, and the names of the 2 men dispatched." She flipped the tablet over. On the screen was a photograph, a file cabinet open, the folders rifled, the dried coffee ring on Patel's desk. "This was taken by one of our people 40 minutes after Vincent's men left." "Then you already have Vincent," Damian said. "We have documentation of 1 instance of evidence destruction in a civil matter. That's not enough." She held his gaze. "What we need is the organizational structure, the financial architecture, the 15 years of operations that Marcus has been documenting, but that exist primarily in your direct knowledge and in records that Vincent Cross does not yet know we've identified. You want me to cooperate? I want you to make a decision about what matters more to you, the organization you built or the people in that bookstore. She said it without drama, which made it worse, because Vincent Cross made his decision about that 2 hours ago. Something in his chest shifted. What happened 2 hours ago? He said. Reyes looked at him for 1 second, a second in which he understood she was measuring whether to use this as leverage or whether the situation had moved past that kind of calculation. Vincent's people picked up the woman and the boy, she said, 40 minutes after you left with our agents. Someone cut Carver Security's comm line and walked 2 men through the back of the bookstore while the front was covered. She paused. The girl, Maya, called 911. Local police responded. By the time they got there, the store was empty. The room's temperature didn't change. Everything else did. Where? Damien said. His voice came out at the same register it had been at. He was proud of nothing about that. It was just what his body did under extreme pressure, went quiet and mechanical, and right now he hated it. We have a probable location. Vincent has a freight operation on the Ashridge waterfront, a decommissioned shipyard he's held through a shell company for 6 years. Our surveillance tracked a vehicle consistent with the description Maya gave to that location 40 minutes ago. Reyes leaned forward. He's not going to hurt them yet. He needs them as leverage, against you, against the cooperation we're asking for, but his window is short. He has a boat scheduled out of that shipyard at 2200 hours tonight. If he gets on that boat, he doesn't get on the boat, Damien said. Then help us make sure he doesn't. She slid a document across the table. Cooperation agreement, full testimony, financial records, organizational structure. In exchange, immunity from prosecution for activities prior to today, witness protection for you and for the Holloway family, and federal intervention at the shipyard within the hour. He looked at the document. He didn't pick it up. You go in there with badges and body armor, he said. Vincent puts a gun to my son's head. We have a tactical unit. I know what tactical units do, and I know how Vincent Cross responds to them because I have watched him respond to high-pressure situations for 30 years. He cut her off, not loudly. He doesn't fold. He escalates. He has spent his entire life in situations where the person across from him had more official power, and he has never once been the one who blinked. He paused. You send your people in first, you get 2 body bags and a hostage crisis. You let me go in first. Absolutely not. You let me go in first, he said again, and you have a man who knows every exit, every protocol, every loyalty structure of everyone inside that building. You have someone Vincent will negotiate with because I am the only leverage he still thinks he has. He held her eyes. You position your people. You give me 40 minutes. If I'm not out in 40 minutes, you breach. Reyes looked at him for a long time. Sign the document, she said. He picked up the pen. They gave him a wire the size of a button and a GPS unit sewn into the lining of a jacket that looked like his jacket and wasn't. And they drove him to the perimeter of the Ashridge waterfront in an unmarked van and let him out 2 blocks from the shipyard gate at 8:47 in the evening. The rain had come back. Not the light coastal mist of the morning, but serious rain, the kind that falls in November with intent. And it turned the shipyard's floodlights into columns of white haze and made the cargo cranes into dark geometric shapes against the sky. The smell coming off the water was diesel and salt, and the particular cold of a working port after hours. Machinery resting, chains still, everything waiting. He walked to the gate. There was a man there, young, heavy through the shoulders, a rain jacket that didn't quite hide the shape at his hip. He looked at Damien and reached for the radio on his belt. Tell Vincent his nephew is here, Damien said. Tell him I came alone. The man studied him, keyed the radio, spoke low, waited. The gate opened. They walked him through the yard, past stacked containers, past a dry-docked hull up on blocks, past the dark windows of the operations office, and into the main loading warehouse through a side door. The inside was vast and half-lit, the high ceiling lost in shadow, the floor wet from a leak somewhere above. 3 more men inside. He cataloged them by position and movement and filed the information in the part of his mind that was running very cold and very fast. Vincent Cross was standing at the far end of the warehouse near the dock entrance, where the massive roll-up doors stood half open onto the black water and the rain beyond. He was 71 years old and looked 60, upright, lean, in a dark coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he held himself with the absolute physical confidence of a man who has not been uncertain about an outcome in 30 years. Claire was to his left. Standing, not bound, but one of Vincent's men was close enough that the geometry of it was clear. She had blood on her lower lip, small, already dried, and her jaw was set with the specific expression of someone who is managing terror through anger, which was the right choice, and Damien registered it and felt something move through him that he pushed down hard. Evan was beside her. The boy's face was white and completely still, and he was holding Claire's hand with both of his, and looking at Damien with the dark, watchful eyes that Damien had been seeing in his own mirror for 35 years. "Nephew," Vincent said. Damien stopped 15 feet away. He put his hands in the jacket pockets, not reaching for anything, just removing them from the equation. "Uncle," he said. Vincent looked at him with the expression of a man reviewing a project that has developed complications. "I expected a phone call, not a personal appearance. The phones aren't safe." "No, they aren't." Vincent's gaze moved to Claire briefly, then back. "She's been very composed, I'll say that for her. The boy, too. Good genes." He said it with the flat precision of someone making a technical observation. Something in Damien's jaw tightened. He let it. "Let them go," he said. "You don't need them now. I'm here." "You're here, yes. Alone, you say. Though I notice your jacket sits differently than it should for a man who came alone." Vincent's eyes were mild and interested. "The Bureau gave you something to wear, I assume." Damien said nothing. "It doesn't matter." Vincent moved 2 steps to the left, unhurried, the movement of a man who is comfortable in the space. "I want to show you something, Damien. I want you to understand this clearly before we discuss what happens next." He nodded at one of the men, who produced a tablet and held it out. On the screen was a document, financial records, corporate structure charts, transaction histories. "This is what Marcus gave the FBI," Vincent said. "A curated selection. Enough to build a case against the organization's lower tiers. Enough to make them feel they have something substantial." He paused. "What Marcus did not give them, what I made sure Marcus never had access to, is the actual financial architecture, the real structure. 11 years of work, Damien. 11 years of building a system that doesn't exist on paper and doesn't exist in any record Marcus ever touched." He took the tablet back and handed it to the man. "The Bureau has a scarecrow," Vincent said. "Impressive from a distance. Nothing inside." He looked at Damien steadily. "Whatever you agreed to in that room today, whatever you signed, you gave them the same shell Marcus gave them. You don't know where the real architecture lives because I never showed it to you. I showed you everything you needed to run operations. I showed you nothing you could use to burn it down." Damien stood in the middle of the warehouse and felt the truth of this land on him and made himself absorb it without showing the impact. "Come home," Vincent said simply. "Close the cooperation agreement. Tell the Bureau that you signed under duress and have reconsidered. It happens. They'll push back, but they have nothing without you." He gestured almost gently toward Claire and Evan. "She takes the boy back to her bookstore. Nothing more happens. You have my word on that." "Your word," Damien said. "My word has held for 30 years. It held because you wrote the terms." Damien kept his voice level. "Every word you've ever given has had an exit built into it that only you could see. I know how you work, Vincent. I learned it from you." Something moved in Vincent's eyes, not anger, something more considered. "Then you know I'm not bluffing," Vincent said. "I know you're not bluffing. I also know you don't get on that boat tonight." Damien took 1 step forward. "Because the real architecture, the 11 years of work, I've known where it lives for 4 years. You built it through Harland Group, registered in the Caymans, managed through a trust in the name of an attorney named William Oster, who has been dead since 2019, but whose legal identity you've maintained as a shell." He watched Vincent's face. "I found it in 2021 when I ran an independent audit of our external holdings, Because I'd started noticing that certain revenues were clearing correctly on paper, but incorrectly in practice. And I pulled the thread, and I found Harland, and I found Oster, and I found 37 subsidiary structures beneath them that weren't in any documentation you ever showed me. The warehouse was very quiet except for the rain on the roof and the water against the dock. Vincent's expression had not changed. That was the frightening thing. It had not changed at all. I didn't confront you, Damien said, because I didn't know yet what it meant. I documented it and I waited. He paused. This morning, I told my lawyer in Philadelphia what to do with the Harland documentation if I wasn't in contact by midnight tonight. The silence stretched. Then Vincent said very quietly, "You're lying." "I'm not." Damien held his gaze without blinking. "You want to board that boat tonight with your real architecture intact? You let them walk out of here right now. You want to test whether I'm lying? You find out at midnight when Sorensen sends everything he has to the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division." He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "That's the deal. That's the only deal." Vincent looked at him for a long time. The look of a chess player who has just been shown a piece he didn't know was on the board, running the verification, checking the angles. "You've been planning this," Vincent said. "No, I've been waiting. There's a difference." Damien kept his hands in his pockets and his shoulders loose and his breathing even. "You planned everything. You planned the separation. You planned Marcus. You planned tonight. I just kept a record." He took another step. 30 years of your plans and one record you didn't know existed. That's what takes you down. Not the Bureau. Not my testimony. One record. Vincent's right hand moved, small, barely visible, and Damien read it and was already pivoting when the man to Vincent's right came forward, and they collided with the full force of 2 bodies in motion, and the floor came up hard, and the impact drove the air out of Damien's chest in a grunt he couldn't suppress. He got a hand up in time to deflect the worst of it. His shoulder took the floor. He rolled, got one knee under himself, and drove upward into the man's center of mass. Not elegant, not trained, just brutal forward momentum. And they went into a stack of wooden pallets that collapsed loudly and sent splinters skidding across the wet concrete. A second man was moving. Damien heard him more than saw him, the specific weight shift sound of someone coming in from the left. And he dropped his head and took the hit across his upper back instead of his skull, which was the right trade even though the pain of it lit up white behind his eyes and buckled his knees for one terrible second. He stayed up, barely. His vision cleared to find Vincent 10 feet away, watching with the expression of a man watching a calculation resolve. The second man was repositioning. The first was getting up from the pallets. 3 other men in the warehouse had not moved, and that told him something, that 2 of Vincent's own people were standing still while this happened, watching without committing. Loyalty fracturing. He filed it. His earpiece, the wire was an earpiece, not just transmission, carried Reyes's voice, controlled and close. "Cross, status." He couldn't answer. He was breathing too hard and Vincent was 6 feet away. "Step back," Vincent said to his men. He said it with the easy authority of someone calling off dogs, and they stepped back. And Damien stood in the middle of the warehouse with blood from somewhere above his eyebrow running into his eye and his back screaming and his breath coming in hard pulls. "You know what disappoints me," Vincent said. "More than the record, more than the Bureau, more than any of this." He looked at Damien with something that might, on a different man's face, have been genuine. "You were the best thing this family produced. You had the clarity I never had at your age. You had the instinct and the control and the will. And I built something worth handing down, and you found a woman in a weekend market who read books, and it undid 30 years of architecture." He shook his head. "For a compass. You bought a compass and gave it away, and it cost me everything." Damien wiped the blood from his eye with the back of his hand. "It didn't cost you everything," he said. "I did. Tonight." He looked at Claire. She was already moving. She'd read the shift in the room the moment the men stepped back, the micro opening, and she pulled Evan with her, fast and low, toward the side door they'd brought Damien through. Vincent turned his head to track her movement. Damien crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and hit Vincent Cross with everything he had left, and they went down together onto the wet concrete of the dock floor, while the rain came through the half-open door and the water slapped against the pilings below. And somewhere outside the perimeter, the Federal Tactical Unit was already moving because Reyes had heard what she needed to hear, and the 40 minutes were up, and the night was about to become very loud. But on the floor of the warehouse, in the 3 seconds before the breach, it was just Damien Cross and his uncle, 30 years of architecture between them, and Damien's forearm across Vincent's chest, and Vincent's hand closed around Damien's wrist, and the old man looking up with an expression that was finally, after everything, something Damien recognized as fear, and Damien looking down at the face that had built him and unmade him and cost him 7 years of his son's life, and breathing through blood and pain and the accumulated weight of everything that had led to this wet floor in this dark warehouse on this November night, and not letting go. The doors came off their hinges a second later, all of them, simultaneously, the side entrance and the dock doors and the roof access, tactical flashlights turning the warehouse into a roaring white landscape, and voices were shouting and boots were on concrete, and somewhere beyond the light, Claire was calling Evan's name, and Evan was answering her, and that voice, that small, specific voice answering its mother in the chaos, was the only thing in the room that Damien Cross was listening to when Vincent's remaining hand stopped fighting and went flat against the concrete floor. The surrender was small and complete. No drama, just a hand opening, fingers spreading against wet concrete, the body beneath it going still with the particular finality of a man who has run his last calculation and found nothing left to run. Damien held him down for 3 more seconds. His forearm was shaking, not fear, just the body's honest account of what the last 10 minutes had cost it. His back was going to be wrong for a week. The cut above his eyebrow was feeding blood steadily into his eye, and he couldn't stop it with his hands occupied, and he didn't try. "Don't move," he said. His voice came out rough and low, and he meant it the way you mean things when there's nothing performative left. Vincent didn't move. 2 tactical agents reached them, and Damien pushed back off his uncle's chest and let them take over and stood up slowly, hand on one knee to get there, and breathed. Just breathed. The warehouse was full of light and noise and the controlled chaos of a breach that had gone correctly. Men on their knees, hands visible, the 2 of Vincent's people who hadn't committed now sitting against the wall with the relieved body language of men who'd made the right choice at the last second. Reyes appeared through the light. She looked at Damien's face, the blood, the way he was holding his right shoulder, and handed him a cloth from her jacket pocket without comment. "The woman and the boy," he said. "Outside. They're outside. They're fine." She held his gaze. "Maya from the store is with them. She followed our perimeter unit down here in her own car. Apparently she's not someone who stays where she's put." He pressed the cloth to his eyebrow and looked past Reyes to where 2 agents were getting Vincent Cross to his feet. His uncle was upright, coat still straight, chin level. 71 years old and assembling his dignity in real time. He looked at Damien once. Not with anger, not with the chess player's calculation, with something older and quieter that Damien had no name for and didn't try to find one. Then the agents turned Vincent toward the door and he disappeared into the lights. Damien stood in the middle of the warehouse and listened to the rain on the roof and the radio traffic and the water below the dock and his own breathing evening out by degrees. Reyes said, "The Harland Group documentation. Sorensen actually has it." "Yes. You weren't bluffing." "No." He lowered the cloth from his eyebrow. "I never bluff. I just wait until I'm not." She looked at him for a moment with something that was almost respect. "Come on," she said. "Your son is outside." He followed her toward the light. The ambulance was parked at the shipyard gate with its side doors open and its interior lights on, and that was where he found them. Evan was sitting on the rear bumper wrapped in a foil emergency blanket that was 3 sizes too large for him, the silver of it catching the red and white of the emergency lights. And he was holding a cup of something hot with both hands and watching the activity in the yard with the wide, careful eyes of a child who has understood that something very serious has happened and is processing it in the particular silent way that children process things that adults haven't explained yet. Claire was beside him, one arm around his shoulders, talking to a paramedic who was doing a blood pressure check she clearly didn't feel she needed and was tolerating out of exhaustion rather than agreement. She saw Damien before Evan did. Her eyes went to the blood on his face first, then to the way he was moving, compensating for the shoulder, favoring the right side, and then to his face itself, which he understood was telling her things he hadn't decided to tell her yet. She said something to the paramedic that ended the blood pressure conversation and stood up. Evan looked up and saw him. The boy slid off the bumper. The foil blanket fell from his shoulders and he didn't notice. He walked across the wet concrete to Damien with the directness of someone who has decided something, and he stopped 2 feet away and looked up. "Mom said you went to get us," Evan said. "Yeah." "Were you scared?" Damien crouched down. His knee complained and his back sent a clear message about the inadvisability of this, and he ignored both. He was eye level with the boy now, close enough to see the dried tracks on his face, where he'd been crying at some point and had stopped, close enough to see the compass at his collar. "Yes," he said. Evan considered this. "Mom gets scared too, but she doesn't show it. She says that's what you do when someone else needs you not to be scared." "Your mom's right about that." "Are the bad people gone?" "The bad people are gone." Evan nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing a report as confirmed. Then he stepped forward the remaining 2 feet and pressed his face against Damien's good shoulder, and his arms came up and he held on with the complete uncommitted force the children use when they've decided to hold on. No calculation, no reservation, just the whole weight of him. And Damien put his arm around the boy and closed his eyes for 3 seconds and breathed. The shipyard noise continued around them. Radios, footsteps, the distant sound of a boat engine being cut. None of it touched the 3 seconds. Then Claire's hand was on his arm and he opened his eyes and stood. And she was right there, close enough that he could see the split in her lower lip had opened again slightly. And she was looking at him with an expression that had shed every layer of armor she'd been wearing since the morning he walked into her bookstore. And underneath all of it, she was tired in a way that went deeper than the night. "It's over," he said. She searched his face. "All of it. All of it." He held her gaze. "Vincent is in custody. The Bureau has the Harlan documentation. Reyes says the financial crimes case alone will take 3 years to fully prosecute." He paused. "It's over." She breathed out slowly, and the breath shook only at the very end, which was the closest he would see her come to falling apart. And then she straightened her spine and looked past him at the shipyard and the lights, and the end of 7 years of living carefully in a town small enough to feel safe. "What happens to you?" she said, quiet and direct. "Cooperation agreement. Full testimony. Immunity from prior activities." He watched her face. "I won't do time, but I'll be in front of investigators for a long time. The dismantling process, the organizational structure, the shell companies, the people who need to be identified, that takes years." "Years," she said. "I'll be in Ashridge," he said. "I'm not going anywhere, unless you tell me to." She looked at him for a long moment. Evan had migrated back to the ambulance bumper and reclaimed his foil blanket and his hot drink, and was watching them with the frank interest of a child who knows something important is being decided by the adults. "I'm not telling you to," she said. "Go on." The weeks that followed had a texture unlike anything in Damien's experience, which was an experience that included no shortage of difficult and demanding circumstances, but very little of the particular difficulty of learning to exist inside ordinary life. He took a room at a bed and breakfast on the north end of Harbor Street, a Victorian house run by a woman named Mrs. Calvert, who was 74 years old and asked no questions about his profession, and made exceptionally good coffee and left a lamp on in the front window when her guests were out late, which Damien found he was grateful for in a way he couldn't entirely account for. He paid month to month. He did not think about the longer term. He met with Reyes twice a week in Burlington, and those meetings were long and technical and occasionally contentious, because giving over the architecture of 15 years of operations was not a clean process. There were things that had to be named that had cost people significantly, and Damien named them without flinching and without minimizing, which Reyes had not entirely expected, and which seemed to recalibrate her assessment of him incrementally across the weeks. He did not ask for credit for this. It was not something he'd done that deserved credit. It was the price of the agreement, and he paid it fully. Marcus Ewell's cooperation agreement collapsed in the 3rd week when it emerged that 3 of the documents he'd provided to the Bureau had been selectively edited. Key routing information removed that would have implicated Vincent's deeper network, but also would have exposed Marcus's own commission structure within it. The Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit caught it during cross-referencing with the Harlan documentation. Marcus was reclassified as a subject. His lawyer issued statements. The statements made no difference. Damien heard about this from Reyes on a Tuesday morning in Burlington and sat with it for a moment and felt the thing he'd expected to feel, a cold and retrospective anger, arrive and pass through him without taking up residence. 9 years. It was an enormous betrayal, and it was done. And the person who had done it was now in a federal holding facility outside of Boston and would be there for a very long time. Damien had already paid the cost of it. There was nothing additional to do with the feeling. He drove back to Ashridge. He had been stopping by the bookstore most afternoons. Not always for long, sometimes just to carry in a delivery box or fix the heater in the office that had been running irregular since October, or to sit at the cafe table with cold coffee while Claire moved through the store doing the 100 small administrative tasks that kept a small independent business functioning. He was useful in ways he hadn't expected to be. He had, it turned out, a facility for the logistical and organizational side of running a small operation, which should not have surprised him given his background, but which amused Claire visibly when she chose to let it. Evan came home from school at 3:15 and the bookstore became a different place at 3:15. Louder, more inhabited, the particular energetic disorder of a 7-year-old depositing a backpack and an opinion about his day, and a series of questions that ranged from the practical to the cosmological with no warning between them. Damien learned to be present for this. It was not natural at first. He was a man who had spent 35 years existing in controlled environments, managing information flow, rationing his own presence strategically. The unfiltered, non-strategic presence of a child. The way Evan would simply sit beside him at the cafe table and read his library book and occasionally say something completely unrelated to anything and expect a genuine response. Required a kind of attention that was not strategic and could not be managed and had to be learned from scratch. He learned it slowly. He made mistakes. He answered questions too briefly, and Evan would look at him with a patient expectation that said more clearly than words that this was not the quantity of answer required. He was sometimes distracted by his phone, and Evan would simply wait, with a stillness that was uncanny in a 7-year-old, until the phone went away. He got better. One afternoon in the 3rd week, Evan asked him about the compass. They were at the cafe table, Evan with his library book, a different one now, something about ocean currents, and Damien with a cup of coffee that had been hot when Maya made it and was no longer. Evan put the book face down on the table and picked up the compass from where it had fallen outside his shirt and held it up between them. "Mom said you gave this to her," Evan said. "Yes." "Before I was born." "Before you were born." Evan turned it in his fingers. The late afternoon light from the window caught the worn silver. Why? Damien looked at the compass. He thought about a jewelry shop in Providence and $60 and an old man with a loop pushed up on his forehead and the feeling of doing something either very right or very stupid. "I wanted her to be able to find her way back," he said, "if she ever needed to." Evan processed this with the serious attention he gave to things that seemed important. Find her way back to where? Somewhere good. Damien paused. I didn't know where that was at the time. I just wanted her to have the option. Evan looked at the compass for another moment, then tucked it back under his shirt with the careful habit of someone returning a valued object to its proper place. "She found it," he said. Matter of fact, the straightforward conclusion of a 7-year-old who has evaluated the evidence. "Yeah," Damien said. "She did." Evan picked up his book and went back to ocean currents. Amount. The legal proceedings moved at the speed of large institutional machinery, which was not fast. Vincent Cross's arraignment was covered by 2 national outlets and the local Burlington paper, and then receded into the interior pages of the news cycle, which was where complex financial crime cases lived, important and largely unread. His attorney was excellent and expensive and filed motions that would slow the process for months. None of this concerned Damien because Reyes had the Harlan documentation, and Sorensen had a copy, and the copy had a copy, and the case was not built on testimony alone. and Vincent Cross was 71 years old and would not see the outside of a federal facility again in his functional lifetime. That was not a thought Damien held with satisfaction. He had expected to, and he didn't. It was just a fact. The man who had built him and lied to him and cost him 7 years of his son's life was going to prison, and the world would continue to turn, and Evan would go to school tomorrow and ask complicated questions about ocean currents. And that was the actual victory, quiet and unremarkable and worth more than anything Vincent Cross had ever built. Marcus pled guilty in the 4th week to 3 counts of conspiracy and 1 count of wire fraud, accepting a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation. Damien was not asked to comment. He didn't. He found out about it from Reyes on a Wednesday morning and drove back to Ashridge and parked on the harbor overlook and looked at the water for a while. The fishing boat he'd watched weeks ago, the morning after Vincent's call, or one like it, he couldn't know for certain, was moving toward the breakwater again, running lights still on against the gray morning. He watched it clear the breakwater and diminish toward open water and thought about 9 years. The specific texture of 9 years of trust that had been manufactured from the beginning. He thought about the calls Marcus had answered from hospital beds. He thought about the voice on the encrypted line saying someone in your travel chain with the flat professional neutrality of a man narrating his own operation. He thought about the fact that Marcus's betrayal had also, inadvertently, led him to Ashridge, to a boy running into traffic after a paper airplane, to a compass he'd given away 8 years ago, hanging at his son's collar in the cold November air. He didn't know what to do with that arithmetic. He left it unresolved and drove back into town. Hook. Claire told him about the pregnancy on a Sunday evening in the bookstore's office, 3 weeks after the shipyard. Not the current pregnancy. There wasn't one. But the original circumstances. The decision she'd made 8 years ago that he had never fully asked her about and she had never fully offered. She told him because she'd decided to, which was the only way she did things. She'd been 23 and 8 weeks along when she understood the complete impossibility of the situation as it existed. Not Damien himself, not her feeling about him, but the structural reality of what his life was and what a child's life inside that structure would be. She had also, she said without softening it, received a visit from a man she hadn't known at the time was connected to Vincent. A man who had suggested, with the specific courtesy of someone delivering an ultimatum in polite language, that certain arrangements could be made if she chose to step back, and that certain other arrangements would be necessary if she didn't. She had not told Damien this at the time because she had looked at the situation and made a calculation that she was not certain, even now, was wrong. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she was done, the office was quiet, the space heater ticking, the store dark beyond the door. Maya had gone home an hour ago. Evan was upstairs asleep with the compass on the nightstand where he kept it. "You should have told me," he said. "I know. I know what you would have done." Her voice was steady. "That was part of the calculation. You would have tried to manage it, to protect us inside the structure you were already inside. And the structure would have closed around us and we would have been—" She stopped. "I don't know what we would have been, but I know what Vincent wanted us to be. Leverage. The same leverage he tried to use 2 weeks ago." He sat with this. "I'm not asking you to tell me I was right," she said. "I'm telling you what happened and why. Because you deserve to know and because I'm done carrying it alone." He looked at his hands on the desk. The bandage was gone now, the palm healed to a shiny scar below his thumb. The gravel from a wet sidewalk on a morning he would remember precisely for the rest of his life. "You kept the compass," he said. "Yes. For 7 years. I kept it because it was the one thing that was true," she said quietly. "Everything else I could reframe or manage or explain away. The compass was just the compass. It didn't mean anything I didn't want it to mean, and it meant exactly what it meant." He looked at her across the desk in the warm light of the office that smelled of coffee and old paper and the space heater's particular dust. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the part of this that was mine." "I know." She held his gaze. "I'm sorry too. It wasn't a resolution. It was something more honest than a resolution, which was 2 people acknowledging the full weight of what had happened without trying to make it lighter than it was, and agreeing, without a formal agreement, to carry it forward differently. December came to Ashridge with the particular combination of cold and light that coastal towns in winter produce, the low sun at an angle that made everything look slightly luminous and slightly exhausted, the harbor traffic reduced to working boats and the occasional determined tourist, the storefronts putting up their window decorations in the pragmatic, rather than lavish style of towns where winter is not a season to be performed, but endured. Holloway's dressed its window with string lights and a rotating display of winter books and a hand-lettered sign that was entirely Claire's handwriting and said, in dark green letters on cream paper, "Come in. It's warm." Maya had added, below it in a different hand, "Also the coffee is better than the place across the street," which Claire had left up because it was true. Damien walked Evan to school on the mornings that were dry. This had begun as a practical arrangement. Claire had an early supplier delivery on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the walk was 6 blocks, and Evan knew the route, and had extended beyond Tuesdays and Thursdays without a formal conversation about extending it. Evan used the walks to ask questions. There was always a question. The questions ranged across topics with the democratic curiosity of a mind that had not yet decided which things were worth caring about and which weren't, and Damien answered them as honestly as he was able, which required more thought than he expected because Evan had an instinct for follow-up questions that found the gaps in incomplete answers. One morning in the second week of December, 3 blocks from the school, Evan said, "Are you going to stay?" Damien looked down at him. The boy was watching the sidewalk, hands in his jacket pockets, the compass under his collar. "Yes," Damien said. Evan nodded once, the report-confirmed nod. Then, "Okay." That was the whole conversation. They walked the remaining 3 blocks in the comfortable silence of 2 people who have resolved something and don't need to add to it. And at the school gate, Evan turned and went in without looking back. The way kids go through doors when they're certain of what's on the other side of them. And Damien stood on the sidewalk in the December cold and watched the doors close and stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned and walked back toward Harbor Street. The thing about building a different life, Damien found, was that it didn't happen in a single decision. He had expected it to be an event, a before and after, a clear line. It wasn't. It was a series of very small choices made in ordinary moments, and the ordinary moments were relentless and unmerciful and did not accommodate the version of himself that needed everything to be structured and controlled and navigated from a safe distance. He fixed the heater in the bookstore's office properly, with parts ordered from a supplier 2 towns over. He learned that Evan's preferred dinosaur was not the one most children preferred, which was the large predatory one, but the Ankylosaurus, because, Evan explained with the patience of someone who had delivered this information before, it had survived by being defensive rather than aggressive, and that was underrated. He learned that Claire read before sleep every night without exception, and that the books she chose for this were almost never the literary fiction she sold at the front of the store, but paperback thrillers with creased spines that she kept in a separate stack and didn't shelve publicly. He learned that she took her birthday seriously, and that Evan's birthday in March was an event of significant logistical complexity that she began planning in January. He learned that he could sit in a room with 2 other people and have nothing to manage and nothing to protect against and nowhere else to be, and that this was not emptiness but something he lacked the previous vocabulary for. He was learning the vocabulary. On the last Sunday before Christmas, Claire hung a restored compass above the reading corner where Evan did his homework after school. Not the pendant. That stayed with Evan where it belonged. This was a larger piece, a ship's compass in a brass housing that she'd found in an antique shop in the next town over and had cleaned and restored herself over 2 weekends. The brass polished back to something close to its original finish, the card inside still rotating freely and true. She hung it on a small bracket above the reading chair and stepped back and looked at it. Evan came downstairs and looked at it and said, "That's a good place for it," with the calm approval of someone whose opinion on interior arrangement is rarely solicited but always correct, and went to the kitchen. Damien stood in the doorway of the reading corner and looked at the compass and its brass housing catching the lamplight. The needle settled to north as it always would, as it always had, as it would continue to do long after the people in this room were done with their particular complications and their particular griefs and their particular hard-won ordinariness. Claire came to stand beside him. They stood in the doorway together and looked at the compass and didn't say anything, because there was nothing left to say that the room wasn't already saying, and the lamp was warm, and upstairs Evan was moving around with his characteristic noise and his characteristic questions that would arrive at dinner without warning, and outside the December wind was doing what December wind did to a coastal town that had learned to withstand it, and the bookstore's windows were lit against the dark street, and anyone walking past on Harbor Street would see the glow of them and know, without needing to know anything else, that this was a place where someone had decided to stay. Damian Cross had spent 15 years building things designed to last through force and control and the strategic management of every variable. He had built an organization that had survived federal scrutiny and internal betrayal and the accumulated pressure of decades, and he had handed all of it over to a woman with a legal pad and walked away from it. And none of it had been as difficult as learning to stand in a doorway and let the warmth of a room be enough. He was learning. Outside, the harbor wind moved through Harbor Street, and the bookstore's sign creaked once on its bracket, and the lights held against the dark, and the compass above the reading corner pointed north the way it always had, the way it always would, steady and indifferent and true.